A whisper beneath Blackfriars Bridge. Was it warning or bait? Welcome to Detective Noir. I am your host, Daniel Mercer. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Your voices make this journey unforgettable. Let's begin. It was on a gray morning in late November that I found myself once again summoned to Baker Street. The fog outside so thick it clung to one's overcoat like damp gauze. The fire crackled in its grate when I entered. And there sat Sherlock Holmes, cross-legged upon the settee, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his gaze fixed on a damp scrap of paper pinned to the mantel with a penknife. "You are late, Watson," he said without lifting his eyes. "Had you been precisely 7 minutes earlier, you might have met the man who left this curious note." I had barely shed my gloves before curiosity compelled me forward. "A client?" Holmes's lips twitched in faint amusement. "Of a sort." He did not give his name, nor did he remain long enough to explain the note's contents. It was found by Mrs. Hudson, tucked beneath the front door knocker no more than 20 minutes ago. The ink is still damp. I peered closer. The paper bore only a few lines in a shaky, almost trembling hand. He said the whisper was the last thing he heard. "Blackfriars Bridge, tonight. Look where the fog touches the river." "A prank?" I asked. Holmes stood and moved to the window, drawing back the curtain to reveal a ghostly view of Baker Street. "Would that it were. But something in the phrasing, Watson, the whisper, the fog. These are not the ornaments of a joker. They are the symbols of a mind in distress, or perhaps a trap laid by one who knows how to bait a hook." He turned abruptly. "Dress warmly. We are going to Blackfriars." We arrived there by hansom just before dusk, the gas lamps casting a jaundiced glow over the embankment. London, cloaked in mist, had taken on a ghostly hush as if the very air were listening. Holmes paused mid-span on the bridge, eyes darting to the swirling current below. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, tapping the iron railing. "Scratches, fresh. Someone leaned here recently, quite agitated. Note the pattern. The left hand gripped harder than the right, possibly due to a limp or deformity." I followed his gaze but saw only the churning blackness of the Thames. Holmes was not finished. "And here, by the base of the lamppost, do you see that?" He crouched and retrieved a small crumpled scrap of fabric. It was a collar, torn from a gentleman's overcoat, its stitching fine but discolored by the damp. "No blood," I noted. "No, but note the initials. J.A.H." Holmes turned it in the light, embossed faintly in gold thread. Someone meant to be identified, if not by name, then at least by status. This is not the property of a vagrant. Just then, a cry echoed across the bridge, a cabman's voice raised in alarm. Holmes and I turned sharply. From the shadows emerged a constable, his face pale and voice strained. "Sir, there's a man, or what's left of him, washed up by the barge pier. No face left to speak of. Looks like the river's kept its secrets again." Holmes did not flinch. "Take us there." We followed the constable down a winding stone stair to the lapping waters. There, on a tangle of debris caught between two mooring posts, lay a corpse, its clothes waterlogged, face bloated beyond recognition. But Holmes crouched and withdrew something from the man's coat pocket. "A watch," he said, holding it up. "Still ticking." "Impossible," I whispered. "After being submerged?" Holmes said nothing. He turned the watch over, then handed it to me. Engraved on the back in a script I would later come to dread were the words, "To James A. Harrington, in gratitude." G.C. Holmes straightened slowly. "Watson, tonight we shall not sleep. I have a strong suspicion that the whisper from Blackfriars Bridge has only just begun to speak." And with that, the fog seemed to draw tighter around us, as if the city itself were listening in. The morning following our grim discovery at Blackfriars Bridge found Holmes in his dressing gown, pacing the length of our sitting room like a man whose thoughts raced leagues ahead of the hour. The watch, which had been wound so curiously tightly despite its journey through the Thames, lay disassembled upon the table next to Holmes's chemical apparatus. Tiny gears and springs sat in neat rows like a mechanical autopsy. I sipped my tea, observing him in silence until he halted and, without turning, asked, "Watson, what do you make of the engraving?" "To James A. Harrington, in gratitude, G.C. A gift from a friend, certainly. Or perhaps an employer." Holmes gave a brief, approving nod. Gratitude in this instance implies a service rendered. And the use of initials, G.C., suggests the giver's identity was not meant to be concealed but rather is so well known to Harrington that full names were unnecessary. It is a personal token, yet not an intimate one. Likely professional. He paused, then added, I made inquiries early this morning. There was, until very recently, a Mr. James Abernathy Harrington employed at the Colonial Office. I raised my brows. The Colonial Office? That would explain the high-quality tailoring and the initials on the collar. Just so. According to the records, Mr. Harrington had taken an extended leave of absence for health reasons. He had not returned to his post, though he was due to resume this week. Holmes tapped the table. I need you, Watson, to accompany me to Holland Park. Mrs. Harrington, his widow, though she does not yet know it, resides there. The hansom ride across the city was brisk but silent. Holmes's silence was not uncommon in moments of heavy thought, and I knew better than to disrupt his internal operations with idle chatter. When we arrived at the Harrington residence, a fine, ivy-clad home with a tidy gravel drive, I could not help but wonder how such a quiet, respectable dwelling might fit into the sinister shadows of Blackfriars Bridge. A maid showed us into the drawing room, and shortly thereafter Mrs. Harrington entered. She was a woman of middle years, composed but visibly strained, her hands wringing the edge of her sleeve as she greeted us. I'm not certain I understand the nature of your visit. Mr. Holmes, she said, her voice tight. James only returned from the coast 2 days ago. He's not at home now, but I expect him back any hour. I regret that I must trouble you under uncertain circumstances, Holmes said gently, but your husband's name has come up in connection with an incident near Blackfriars Bridge. I would ask you a few questions, and I promise to be as discreet as possible. She nodded, suspicion flickering behind her eyes. What sort of incident? Holmes did not answer directly. Instead, he asked, When did you last see your husband, madam? Last night. He went out after dinner. Said he had to meet someone privately. An old colleague, I believe, though he would not say whom. He was vague. Yes, I found it strange. He's usually so orderly. But lately, she hesitated. He's been distracted, withdrawn. Ever since his return from convalescence. He wouldn't speak of it, not really. But I suspect something happened while he was away. Something troubling. Did he receive any visitors? Letters perhaps from persons unknown? She gave a slow nod. There was a man. Tall, dark coat, foreign accent. Came to the door the day after James returned. They spoke in the study for half an hour. When I asked about it, James dismissed it as nonsense. But afterward, he locked the windows, checked them repeatedly. That was not like him. Holmes turned his head sharply. This man, could you describe him more precisely? Anything at all? She frowned in recollection. He had a limp, a pronounced one, and he carried a walking stick, though he barely used it. I remember because when he took it off his arm to shake James's hand, he nearly dropped it. Holmes's eyes brightened as if a match had been struck. Did your husband mention the name G.C.? Her brow furrowed. No, should he have? Perhaps not, Holmes said cryptically. Madam, I must ask a difficult question. Did your husband have any enemies? She looked genuinely startled. James, no, never. He was courteous to a fault, perhaps overly trusting. Holmes stood and offered a slight bow. Thank you for your candor. I may have further questions in time, but I will not intrude longer this morning. Outside, Holmes's mood grew brisk. It becomes clearer, Watson. We must next locate this foreign visitor with the limp. And the watch? Holmes gave a dry smile. The watch is vital. It was wound post-mortem, Watson. I stopped short. But you said... I said it was ticking. I did not say it made sense. No man in his right mind winds a watch before leaping into the Thames, which means he didn't. Someone wanted that timepiece found ticking. Then, to disguise the time of death? Precisely. We returned to Baker Street by way of the embankment, Holmes pausing to send telegrams at Charing Cross. Once home, he lit his pipe and stretched upon the couch, eyes closed but clearly at work within his mind's labyrinth. Let us consider, he murmured. The limp. The man at the bridge likely stood at the railing, hence the uneven grip marks. If that was our foreign visitor, then perhaps he lured Harrington there under false pretenses. But the watch, why ensure it be found working unless the intention was misdirection? Someone wanted the authorities to misjudge the interval between disappearance and death. I sat forward. Could the man have died elsewhere and been placed in the river later? The river later. The river. Holmes opened one eye, That is now my working hypothesis. I have already dispatched Lestrade to inquire about any incidents or sightings of disturbances near the South Bank. I suspect Harrington did not enter the river by his own volition. There came then a sharp knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram. Holmes tore it open, scanned the page, and let out a soft hum of satisfaction. It's from Lestrade. A night watchman near the docks reported seeing a man matching Harrington's description being carried, by two others near a warehouse not far from Bankside. One of the men, according to the watchman, walked with a pronounced limp. Holmes stood. "Watson, the whisper from Blackfriars Bridge is beginning to shout. Fetch your revolver. We are going hunting." We were soon in another hansom bound for the South Bank. Holmes sat rigid, his fingers steepled once more. The air outside had thickened into another wet mist, obscuring the streets like gauze on a wound. As we approached the docklands, Holmes's voice emerged from the gloom. "Someone went to elaborate lengths to stage this death, Watson. They fabricated the scene, manipulated the time, and planted a clue meant only for one man." "Who?" Holmes's eyes glittered. "Me." The fog thickened as we crossed into Southwark, swallowing the glow of the gas lamps and reducing the outlines of warehouses and moored barges to indistinct shapes. The driver led us down near the Clink Wharf, where crooked streets sloped toward the river and the air smelled of coal smoke, wet hemp, and tidewater. It was not yet 6, but already the evening darkness pressed close. Holmes led the way with quick, silent steps, pausing now and then to consult a scribbled map he had unfolded from his coat. "The watchman who sent the report. He patrols from St. Mary Overy's dock to the Old Swan Stairs. He marked the sighting near an abandoned cooperage just behind a shuttered tannery. It seems our quarry does not fear foul air." As we turned into a narrow alley, a figure stepped out from the shadows. Inspector Lestrade, his bowler hat tilted against the drizzle, offered a curt nod. "You were right to call for me, Mr. Holmes. The place is just ahead. The watchman, name of Scarrett, is waiting for us. Bit shaken he is." Lestrade led us down a crooked lane flanked by rotting fences and walls overgrown with ivy. We came to a low warehouse built of soot-blackened brick, its windows boarded over, its doors chained. A gas lantern flickered in the watchman's trembling hand as he stepped forward, tugging his cap. "It were 3 of 'em," he said hoarsely, one tall and limping. "They came down that lane about 2 o'clock last night, dragging something between 'em. Couldn't see clear what it was, but it didn't move of its own accord, if you understand me. They stopped right there, by that gate." Holmes was already at the gate, stooping low. "Footprints. 2 heavy sets, 1 lighter. And here, see this, Watson, a smear. Blood dried into the mortar." Lestrade bent beside him. "They dumped a body here?" Holmes did not answer. Instead, he followed the trail around the side of the warehouse to a rusted door half-hinged and wrenched it open. Inside, the smell was rancid. Mildew, salt, and something fouler still. Our lanterns cast long shadows across broken crates and coiled rope. Holmes walked slowly, scanning the floor. "They left no body, but they left traces." He stopped abruptly beside a large barrel overturned near the corner. Reaching inside with a gloved hand, he withdrew a strip of torn fabric, coat lining water-stained and stiff with congealed blood. Pressed into it was a tiny metal clasp with a government insignia, the lion and crown. "Colonial Office," I said quietly. Holmes held it to the lantern. "Harrington was not merely murdered. He was interrogated." Lestrade frowned. "You believe they tortured him?" Holmes nodded. "And when they'd learned what they came for, they disposed of him where no one would think to look until the tide revealed him, dressed him again, planted the watch, left a message meant to draw attention only from one particular quarter." I narrowed my eyes. "But why alert you? Surely they wished the matter buried." "That," said Holmes, "is the paradox that defines this crime. Someone among the killers wanted the deed to remain hidden, hence the river. But someone else, a second hand, wanted me drawn in." We left the warehouse and followed Holmes back into the fog. "There's more here, Watson. A layered design. This is no mere political assassination. The message, the watch, it was not carelessness. It was deliberate. We must ask ourselves, what did Harrington know that warranted such elaborate staging?" Back at Baker Street, Holmes paced furiously while I sat by the hearth with Harrington's torn coat lining. He paused only to scribble telegrams, one to Mycroft, another to a contact at the Admiralty. By the time Mrs. Hudson brought in tea, Holmes had collapsed into the armchair with a grunt of satisfaction. I have a theory, Watson. It requires confirmation. But first, I must show you something. He reached into his coat pocket and retrieved the tiny clasp bearing the insignia. Do you recall? He said. The initials GC engraved on Harrington's watch? Of course. There is a Geoffrey Calloway, he said, an attaché at the Colonial Office and close friend of Harrington's. I found mention of him in the staff directory. He too went on leave conveniently 3 weeks ago. He never returned. You suspect foul play? I suspect a substitution. Holmes stood. We must call upon the Colonial Office first thing tomorrow. If Calloway is alive, we shall know whether he sent that watch. If not, then we must consider whether the man with the limp was using his identity as cover. Or perhaps, I suggested, Calloway is the man with the limp. Holmes gave me a sharp look. An interesting hypothesis, Watson. It would fit neatly, too neatly. The next morning found us amid the stone austerity of Whitehall, walking briskly past sentries and into the sunlit halls of the Colonial Office. A clerk led us through several corridors before delivering us to a thin man with hollow cheeks and a gaze like a measuring stick. I am Under-Secretary Halberd, he said, shaking Holmes's hand without enthusiasm. You've questions about Mr. Harrington, I understand. Holmes wasted no time. We are investigating his death. The man froze. Death, Mr. Holmes? I had no notification. He was pulled from the Thames 2 nights ago. Identified by personal effects in a fragment of his coat. We believe foul play. Halberd sank into his chair. My word, I knew he was unwell. I did not know he was in danger. What was Harrington working on prior to his leave? Holmes asked. The official hesitated. That is sensitive, but, well, he was overseeing coded correspondence between our embassies in Bengal and Nairobi. Something to do with intercepted telegrams. Routine work, really. Any recent breaches in security? Holmes pressed. A flicker crossed Halberd's face. There were some irregularities, but we've since corrected the cipher. Was Mr. Calloway involved? Halberd frowned. Calloway? Yes, he was Harrington's counterpart in Kenya. Why? Because he may either be dead or in London masquerading as someone else. Halberd blanched. My God, you think this is espionage? I think it is murder, Holmes said, but murder arranged with diplomatic precision. As we stepped back onto the street, Holmes's expression had gone hard. Watson, he said, we are dealing with something greater than a single killing. Harrington discovered a channel through which information was leaking, perhaps falsified dispatches, or fabricated reports from the colonies. That alone was worth his life, but why leave the message? Because someone else, perhaps a third party in the shadows, wants the deception stopped. We have 2 forces here, Watson, one to silence, one to expose. A boy approached us with a telegram. Holmes read it and handed it to me. From Mycroft stop, Geoffrey Calloway confirmed missing. Stop, last seen Mombasa. Stop believed, presumed, drowned.
Stop, body never recovered. Stop, Holmes lit a cigarette, his face unreadable.
Then the man with the limp is not Calloway. He is someone who wants us to think he is. I stared at him. Then who is he? Holmes flicked ash onto the pavement. That, my dear Watson, is the next riddle. And I propose we begin solving it where his trail began, at Blackfriars Bridge, the place where whispers turn into traps. We returned to Blackfriars that evening. The sky a steel-gray shroud and the river below as opaque as oil. The wind off the water had the sharp metallic sting of November, and the fog, though thinner than the previous nights, still clung to the arches and railings like a memory reluctant to fade. To fade. Holmes walked the length of the bridge in silence, gloved hands behind his back, his gaze low and searching. The phrase in the note, he murmured finally, look where the fog touches the river. It is both poetic and precise. It indicates a location, Watson, not merely a general atmosphere. I followed his gaze to the south side of the bridge, where the supports descended into the slow-moving murk. From the angle we stood, a narrow strip of bank was visible, half hidden by the curve of the embankment wall. A place neither easily reached nor easily watched. Holmes knelt to examine the iron railing once more. Here, he said, these scratches. I noted them before. Now I see they are more than signs of tension. They are markings etched with something sharp. A code. He reached into his coat and retrieved a small magnifying lens, then examined the metal carefully. 3 vertical lines, then 1 horizontal, followed by a single arrow. A tally? I suggested.
Or a date?
Neither. They are directional, a guide. He rose with sudden energy. The fog touches the river where it swallows sight. Come, Watson. We are going below. There was a stone stair built into the embankment wall that led to the lower walkway beside the bridge. Slippery with moss and half forgotten by the city, it descended into shadow. We made our way down carefully, lantern in hand, until we reached a narrow shelf of riverbank, hemmed in by stone on one side and water on the other. Holmes stopped before a low arch beneath the southernmost span of the bridge. The stonework there was old, patched in places with newer mortar, but there was something else, something faint but deliberate. There, he said. Do you see the outline? It was a door. Not a full one, but a small square panel set flush with the stone, cleverly painted to match its surroundings. A hidden entrance. Holmes pulled a narrow blade from his coat and ran it along the edges. With a creak, the panel shifted inward. A gust of damp air emerged, musty and tinged with oil. Holmes handed me the lantern and crawled through. I followed, stooping low, and found myself in a brick-lined passage no wider than a coal chute. The air was close and stale, the walls slick with condensation. After some 20 paces, the passage opened into a chamber, an old storage vault, likely abandoned since the expansion of the embankment. But it was not empty. A table stood at its center, and on it maps, letters, and photographs were arranged in meticulous rows. Holmes stepped forward and examined them in silence, the yellow glow of the lantern illuminating lines and names in a dozen hands. These are shipping manifests, he said. Communications between colonial officials and trade envoys. Some are in cipher, others in Swahili, Portuguese, even Persian. This is not the work of one man, Watson. This is the center of an intelligence web. And it was here all along? I asked, stunned. Beneath the bridge? Holmes picked up a page. Note the dates. Some of these are recent, others months old. This place has been used regularly. He turned and pointed at a stack of ledgers bound in string. The handwriting here, does it seem familiar to you? I bent closer. It's the same hand as the note, indeed. The same tremor, the same slant. Which means, whoever left the message for me had access to this place. They wanted it found, I felt a chill. Then why not simply come to you directly? Because they are being hunted. Just as Harrington was. Holmes rifled through the pile and extracted a crumpled telegram. From Zanzibar. Dated a week before Harrington's death. He read it aloud. To J.A. Harrington from G.C. Stop the arrangement, they know everything, do not trust the man with the limp. We both stood in silence. G.C. is alive, I said at last. Calloway never drowned. Holmes's expression was grim. Yes, and he tried to warn Harrington. But the message arrived too late. A sound behind us, a faint scrape of movement, made Holmes spin. He snatched the lantern and swept its light toward the door. Nothing, just the passage we had entered by. But Holmes was already moving, back through the narrow corridor, silent as a cat. I followed as best I could, stumbling over the uneven ground. We emerged into the open just in time to glimpse a figure rounding the curve of the embankment wall, tall, swift and unmistakably limping. Holmes took off at once. The chase was brief but intense, our footsteps echoing off stone and iron. The fugitive veered toward the river stairs, but a misstep on the slick stone sent him tumbling to his knees. Holmes was upon him in seconds, pinning him with a firm hand to the shoulder. The man groaned. "Don't kill me!" "No one intends to," Holmes said coldly. "Though you may have reason to fear justice." We pulled him into the light. His face was pale, unshaven, and streaked with grime. The limp was genuine, but his eyes, those eyes held the glint of intellect wrapped in desperation. "Who are you?" Holmes asked. The man hesitated, then said, "I was Calloway's clerk. My name is Eli Velt. I'm the one who sent the note." "Then why run?" "Because someone's always watching," he gasped. "They're everywhere. I saw Harrington killed. They brought him to the cooperage, questioned him for hours. I tried to help him, I swear it. But they knew I'd seen. They've been after me since. I left the watch so someone would come. Someone who could stop them." Holmes's expression was unreadable. "Who is they?" "The man with the limp is named Salazar. He's Portuguese." But he doesn't work alone. There's a ring, smugglers, spies, agents from 3 different countries. They're using trade routes to ferry stolen documents and counterfeit communiques. Harrington stumbled on it by accident. I did too. Where is Calloway? I asked. Dead, Velt whispered. Salazar killed him in Mombasa. Took his identity. Used it to infiltrate the Colonial Office files. Harrington recognized the handwriting on one of the dispatches. That's what started it. Holmes stood and exhaled. Watson, take note. We have corroboration, a name, and a motive. But the danger remains. Velt, how many of Salazar's men are in London? I don't know. 3, maybe 4. They move constantly. He was planning something big. Something tonight, I think. A shipment or a switch. I found a note with a date and a dock number. Pier 14, East India Docks. Holmes looked at me. Then we must not lose time. We brought Velt back to Baker Street and left him under Lestrade's protection. Holmes gathered his revolver and I mine. He barely paused to explain. They'll be at Pier 14 tonight. Salazar cannot risk losing control of his network. If he suspects Velt is alive, he may flee, or kill again. We must intercept him before that happens. As we rode toward the docks, Holmes's face was a mask of resolve. The fog thickened again, curling through the streets like a warning. I knew by the tightness of his mouth and the way he gripped his cane that we were no longer simply solving a murder. We were entering a game of shadows where a single misstep might mean another body in the river. And this time, it could be one of us. The East India Docks loomed before us like a forgotten colossus, their vast warehouses silhouetted in the dim gaslight. Cranes stood idle, skeletal against the sky, and the smell of salt, coal, and fish hung thick in the night air. Holmes led the way along the edge of the wharf, his eyes scanning the dark waters and the high windows above. The fog had settled once more in heavy sheets, muting the few sounds that drifted across the harbor, wood creaking under strain, the splash of a rope against the hull of a moored ship, the faint cry of a gull far out on the river. Pier 14 was at the very end of the dockyard, a neglected finger of land poking into the Thames. A single lantern swung from a crooked post at the far end, casting an intermittent glow across the wooden planks. 2 barges floated silently alongside, their decks unmanned. Beyond them loomed the hulking silhouette of a cargo vessel, the Marquesa as painted in flaking letters on her side. Holmes held up a hand. There, he whispered. The light in the captain's cabin. Someone is aboard, and if Velt's information is to be trusted, Salazar is planning a final operation, one he would not delegate. We advanced with caution, weaving through piles of tarpaulin and stacked crates. Holmes crouched near a bollard and pointed silently toward the far end of the pier. 3 figures were moving in and out of the gloom. One of them walked with an uneven gait. Salazar. Holmes motioned for silence and led me to the shadows beneath the cargo hoist. From there, we had a clear view of the pier and the men at work. They were loading a long crate from one of the barges onto a wheeled trolley. The crate bore no markings, but from the way they handled it, cautious, hushed, it was clearly not a shipment of fish or coal. Holmes leaned in. Note their handling. Whatever is in that crate is valuable, delicate, or dangerous. Possibly all 3. We watched as the crate was rolled up a ramp and into the hold of the Marquesa. Salazar followed close behind, pausing at the hatch and glancing once over his shoulder. He knows we're near, Holmes muttered, but he does not know where. Shall we move in? I asked, hand on my revolver. Not yet. Let him think the night is his. Holmes's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a quiet tension, the calm before a cut. Just then, a low voice murmured from the darkness behind us. You're Holmes? Holmes turned swiftly but did not startle. A short, square-shouldered man emerged from the shadows, a dock worker by the look of him. His clothes worn, but his manner brisk. The name's Cray, he said. Watchman for this pier. The young clerk, the one you're hiding, sent word. Said you'd come, Holmes nodded. Then you know what's at stake. Cray spat into the darkness. Enough to keep my mouth shut. That crate wasn't on any manifest. Came up river last night on a private barge. No inspection. I tried to ask questions. Got told to mind the tide or the tide'll mind me. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Then Salazar means to move something out of the country. Tonight. We were interrupted by a low whistle from the far end of the dock. A 4th figure had appeared. a man in a high-collared coat stepping from the shadows of a nearby warehouse. He carried a small flat case under one arm and walked with purpose. Holmes hissed through his teeth. "Do you recognize him, Watson?" I looked closely. The lantern light caught his face for a moment. Angular, severe, unmistakably foreign. "No," I said, "but he seems to know where he's going." Holmes's voice was grim. "That's Konstantin Dravos, a courier for the Austro-Hungarian legation, and a known intermediary for black market cipher exchanges. I saw his likeness once in Mycroft's files." "Then we must act now," I said. Holmes shook his head. "Not yet. If we catch them in the act, we have more than suspicion. We have treason." He turned to Cray. "Is there another way aboard the Marquesa?" "A quieter one?" The dock worker nodded. "Ladder at the stern. Leads up just below the quarterdeck." Holmes turned to me. "Come, Watson. You and I shall take the ladder. Cray, go find Lestrade. Tell him to bring men, and quickly." Cray nodded and vanished into the fog. Holmes and I crept along the edge of the pier to the ship's stern. The ladder was slick and narrow, bolted into the iron hull. We climbed in silence, my heart hammering as I reached the top. The deck was dimly lit. We crouched behind a coil of rope as two men emerged from the hold, speaking in hushed tones. I could make out only fragments. Lisbon. Second transit. No paper trail. And then, a door creaked open. Salazar appeared. He moved with the ease of one who knew he was in command, a revolver at his hip and a heavy ring of keys in his hand. He barked an order in Portuguese. The others obeyed swiftly, vanishing into the hold once more. Holmes rose slowly, revolver drawn. "I would advise against reaching for that weapon, Mr. Salazar." The man froze, his head turning with uncanny calm. He smiled. "Ah, the famous Holmes. I was told you would come." "And yet you stayed," Holmes replied. "Which tells me this shipment is worth the risk." Salazar's smile faded. "You have no authority here." "No," said Holmes. "But Scotland Yard will shortly. And in the meantime, I have more than enough evidence to see you imprisoned for the rest of your natural life." Salazar's hand twitched. Holmes raised his revolver. "Try it," he said softly. The Portuguese man paused, then laughed. "No need. It's over, Mr. Holmes, but I promise you this. What we sent out before tonight will change everything." Before Holmes could reply, footsteps thundered across the pier. Lestrade's voice rang out. "Holmes!" Within moments, uniformed men swarmed the deck. The crew was seized, the ship secured. Dravos tried to bolt, only to be caught by two constables emerging from the fog. Holmes turned to Salazar. "Your game is finished, and now perhaps we'll learn the truth about Calloway's death and what you hope to accomplish with this final voyage." Salazar only smiled. Later, in a secured office at the Port Authority, we opened the crate. Inside were 3 locked metal boxes. Holmes broke them open one by one. Inside, diplomatic dispatches, military cipher keys, and signed letters implicating several senior colonial officials in a smuggling ring, designed to divert arms and sensitive intelligence through neutral ports. Watson stared at the documents in stunned silence. This would have brought down the whole colonial office. Holmes's face was unreadable, which is precisely why Harrington was silenced. He discovered the extent of the leak and hesitated to report it. Instead, he contacted Calloway, too late. Salazar, having already assumed Calloway's identity, learned of the communication and struck first. Lestrade held up a page. "And this is a list of their targets. 2 governors, 1 high commissioner, all scheduled to receive corrected dispatches, ones filled with false orders." Holmes closed the box. The endgame was not money, but influence. A complete redirection of colonial policy, manufactured instability, a new order, one profitable only to men like Salazar. "And yet," I said, "it all began with a whisper." Holmes nodded slowly. "Yes, Watson, and it ends with one, too." We returned to Baker Street past midnight, the streets quieter than usual, the fog finally beginning to lift. As I poured Holmes a brandy and prepared to write my notes, he stood at the window looking down upon the city. "You know," he said at last, "it troubles me." "What does?" "That this case was not solved by deduction alone, but by the courage of a terrified man who knew just enough to be hunted." "Even so," I said, "you listened." You followed the whisper, he smiled faintly. A rare moment, Watson. When noise can be so easily ignored, but a whisper changes the course of empires. And with that, he turned away from the window, the night behind him, the next case already stirring in the distance. We rose late the next morning, the events of the previous night still reverberating like the last tremors of a distant quake. Holmes, ever resistant to the comforts of rest after a completed case, had not slept at all. I found him seated once again by the window, his fingers drumming the arm of his chair, his expression dark despite the clarity of the morning light that streamed into Baker Street. One would expect satisfaction, I remarked as I stirred my tea. A dangerous web unraveled, international agents apprehended, a conspiracy foiled. And yet you appear disquieted. Holmes turned his eyes from the window and gave a slight nod. That is because I am, Watson. The case, as it was presented to us, is concluded, but not complete. I lowered my cup. In what way? Holmes leaned forward, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. Salazar's men are in custody. Dravos will be tried. The documents seized aboard the Marquesa were authentic, damning and irrefutable. Yet one detail remains unresolved. The man with the limp? I offered. Holmes shook his head. No, Salazar's limp was genuine, but not acquired in Mombasa as he claimed. I found a reference to an injury sustained in Porto 5 years ago. He merely used the limp as a tool, a signature, a clue he intended someone to follow. Then what? The timing. Holmes interrupted, rising now and walking to the mantel. Watson, consider the sequence. Harrington receives a telegram, supposedly from Calloway, warning him not to trust the man with the limp. He meets Salazar that very night. Hours later he is dead, yes, I said. And Velt confirms he was interrogated. Holmes's eyes flashed. But Velt never saw Calloway's body. Nor did anyone else. Only Salazar's account tells us he is dead. What if, Watson, that message, do not trust the man with the limp, was never sent by Calloway at all? I felt my spine stiffen. But the note bore Calloway's initials. Indeed. And how very convenient. So convenient that I must now consider the possibility that Geoffrey Calloway is still alive. But why fake his death? Because Calloway was no fool. If he suspected Salazar had discovered his identity, it would have been the only way to escape the noose tightening around him. But then why would he let Harrington die? Holmes turned away sharply. Unless it served a purpose. One we have not yet seen. We were interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered with a card on a tray. Holmes took it with narrowed eyes. Miss Beatrice Harrington, he read aloud. I stood. His sister. She was mentioned once by the widow, was she not? She lives in Paris. I assumed she had not yet returned. Holmes composed himself and bade Mrs. Hudson to show her in. Miss Harrington was not what I expected. A woman in her early 30s, elegantly dressed in mourning black, with sharp eyes that belied her grief. She entered with calm composure and took the seat Holmes offered. I thank you for receiving me, Mr. Holmes. I am aware of your involvement in my brother's case, and though my sister-in-law refused to speak of your findings, I have come to ask something most unusual. Holmes inclined his head. Please, Miss Harrington. She withdrew a small envelope from her reticule. This arrived at my address in Paris 2 days ago. I believe it was sent by my brother before his death. Holmes took the letter and opened it carefully. The handwriting was indeed Harrington's, tidier than the note left at Baker Street, but unmistakably the same hand. He read aloud, Dearest B, if this reaches you, I may already be dead. I write in haste, uncertain whom to trust. There is a man who calls himself Calloway. Do not believe him. He is not who he claims to be. I fear I have been used. I cannot say more, only that I regret not acting sooner. Burn this letter. J.H. Holmes reread it in silence, then folded it once and placed it on the table. You did not burn it, he said, not accusing, but noting. Beatrice's jaw set slightly. No, I believed it might matter. I hoped you would see it for what it is. Holmes smiled faintly. Indeed, thank you, Miss Harrington. I shall keep this safe. One final question. Have you had any contact with Geoffrey Calloway in the last 6 months? She looked puzzled. Geoffrey? No, I met him once years ago at a diplomatic function. He and my brother were never close, despite what others assumed. Did your brother speak of him recently? Beatrice hesitated, then said, He mentioned that Calloway had written to him from Africa. Something vague. He said it unsettled him, but he never explained further. Holmes nodded slowly. That will be all. You have done a great service. She rose with a whisper of skirts and departed. Holmes stared after her, then turned to me with renewed energy.
Watson, it is now confirmed.
Someone used Calloway's name to send a warning, both to Harrington and to us, but the truth was far more complex. He began to pace again. What if Salazar was only one half of the coin? The visible danger, the foreign agent. But the real betrayal, the one Harrington alluded to, lay closer. Within the Colonial Office itself, I sat up straighter. You believe someone in London orchestrated this entire affair? Holmes stopped. Think of the access required, Watson. The shipping manifests. The forged ciphers. The clearance to delay official correspondence. Only a trusted official could operate at such a level. And who would benefit most from making Salazar the scapegoat? Calloway? Holmes's eyes gleamed. Or someone using Calloway's name. Because Geoffrey Calloway, I now believe, is still alive and has been playing both sides. I felt a cold ripple of apprehension. Then the arrest of Salazar was only half a victory. Exactly. Calloway let Salazar carry the blame. But now he may seek to vanish altogether. At that moment, another telegram arrived. Holmes read it aloud. From Lestrade Marquesa ship's register, false cargo transferred twice before arrival. 2 crew missing, stop searching for identities. Holmes clenched the note. Of course. The crates, Watson, we assumed they were the final shipment. But they were bait. A decoy. He strode to his desk and unfolded the ledger taken from beneath Blackfriars. He traced the entries with his finger, muttering under his breath. Lisbon, Tangier, Calais, Dover. Then he stopped. Here, entry marked Fitzherbert Dock, not Pier 14. That was the diversion. I blinked. Then the true delivery is yet to happen. And Calloway may already be en route. He grabbed his coat and cane. Come, Watson. We must go to Fitzherbert Dock, and we must go quickly. As we stepped out into the cold afternoon, I could not help but feel that the fog had lifted only to reveal a deeper murk. A conspiracy wider and more insidious than either of us had imagined. And at its center, no longer a foreign agent, but a trusted man whose whisper had echoed through death, deceit, and diplomacy. Holmes's pace quickened beside me, his eyes sharp, the game afoot once more. Fitzherbert Dock lay southeast of the tower, a narrow, private quay used primarily for discreet government shipments and cargo not fit for public manifest. The sun was lowering by the time we arrived, and the wind had turned bitter. A row of low warehouses lined the water, their windows dark, the quay unusually quiet for the hour. Only one vessel was moored at the end, a modest steamer painted gray, its nameplate freshly scrubbed. Holmes scanned the dock in silence as we approached. Too quiet, he murmured. No dock workers, no stevedores, and yet a vessel is moored and ready for departure. You suspect it's Calloway's? I asked. Holmes didn't answer at once. Instead, he pointed discreetly to a figure standing near the warehouse gate. A man in an inspector's coat, collar up, a cigarette glowing faintly in the gloom. Our friend Lestrade, Holmes muttered. On time for once. Lestrade greeted us with a clipped nod. We swept the dock at your request, Mr. Holmes. No sign of Calloway, but something's odd with the ship. Linnet is her name, registered out of Southampton, but the registry's false. No cargo listed, no crew on file. One man aboard. Calls himself Mr. Charles. Holmes's lip twitched. A likely pseudonym. The quartermaster says he received orders to depart at dusk, but no manifest. And here's the curious part. The coal delivery was triple the amount needed for a short crossing. He's planning a long voyage, Holmes said. Or he means to disappear altogether. Lestrade looked up. You still think Calloway's alive? I'd wager my violin on it. We moved toward the gangplank, keeping to shadow. Holmes motioned for silence, then gestured to a narrow alley beside the warehouse that offered a concealed approach to the vessel's aft section. We crept along the wall, the sound of the tide beneath the dock the only noise. A dim glow flickered behind a porthole in the ship's cabin. Holmes stepped lightly onto the deck, and I followed, revolver in hand. We crouched beside a coil of rope, watching. Inside, through a slit in the curtain, a man paced, tall, thin, precise in his movements. He bent over a case, withdrawing papers, sealing envelopes, placing them into a canvas bag. Holmes nodded toward him. There, he whispered. Calloway, I peered closer, though I had never met the man. The resemblance to the photograph Holmes had shown me earlier was undeniable. His face older, drawn by stress perhaps, but his bearing was unmistakably that of a civil servant who had long ago learned to trust no one. Holmes whispered, "We must act quickly. If he gets those documents beyond British shores, we may never unravel the true scope of this plot." But before we could move, a voice called out across the dock. "Boatman, you there, hold a moment," we froze. Another figure emerged from the warehouse, a dockhand by appearance, though something in his confident stride betrayed the disguise. Calloway reacted instantly. He snuffed the lamp, gathered the satchel, and flung open the cabin door. Holmes darted up the steps to intercept him. "Going somewhere, Mr. Calloway?" The man froze. The satchel slipped from his hand and hit the deck with a thud. His eyes narrowed. Holmes raised his revolver. "I advise you not to run." Calloway straightened, smoothing his coat. "No need, but I suggest you listen carefully before you act. You may find I'm not the villain in this drama." I came up beside Holmes. "A fine claim, considering your faked death and the body count in your wake." Calloway gave a thin smile. "Necessary illusions. I needed to vanish. Harrington stumbled too close, yes, but I had no hand in his death. I warned him, he ignored it. That cost him dearly." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "You let him die. I couldn't stop it. Salazar was already in London. If I'd intervened, I'd have been next. I needed time to gather everything. The papers in that satchel, names, accounts, routes. A full blueprint of the corruption festering in the Colonial Office. Lestrade appeared at the gangplank, flanked by 2 constables. "Shall we take him in, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes hesitated. One moment more. He turned back to Calloway. "Then why run again? Why not bring this information to the proper authorities?" Calloway's face tightened. "Because they are compromised. I have proof that 3 senior officials at the Foreign Office are on the payroll of Salazar's financiers. If I had submitted my findings through proper channels, they'd have vanished, and I with them. This way, I could deliver everything into the hands of an independent tribunal beyond reach." "By fleeing the country?" I asked. "By crossing into France under diplomatic protection. I've arranged contact with an investigative commission in Paris. They'll have no stake in burying this." Lestrade snorted. A fine tale, or just a better disguise for a traitor. Calloway spread his hands. "The documents will speak for themselves. Speak for themselves. Speak." Holmes stepped forward and retrieved the satchel. He opened it, leafed through the contents, his face unreadable. "Watson," he said softly. "Look here." I leaned over and examined the documents. They were detailed, meticulously kept. Ledgers of bribes, internal memos, lists of encoded messages. One sheet bore the names of 3 men, P. Wentworth, S. Aubrey, C. Ellis, each followed by bank transactions in Lisbon and Casablanca. Lestrade whistled. "If that's real, it could blow the whole office to pieces." Holmes looked up at Calloway. "And you mean to deliver this to the French?" "They'll act. Britain won't, until someone forces their hand." Holmes was silent for a long moment, then snapped the satchel shut. "You will not leave tonight, Mr. Calloway, nor will you vanish again. But you will come with me. We shall arrange an escort to a secure location. These documents will be examined independently." Calloway gave a dry laugh. "You'll never keep them safe. You underestimate what these men are capable of." "I do not," Holmes said coldly. "But I also do not believe in justice through escape." Lestrade stepped forward. "Right. We'll take him in." As the constables led Calloway off the ship, Holmes lingered at the rail, staring down at the black water. "You believe him," I said. "I believe he saw the corruption," Holmes replied, "and I believe he tried to stop it. But his methods, his deceptions, they make him dangerous even now. He saved the truth only because it served his survival. And if we hadn't found him," Holmes turned to me, "then we would have another corpse, another ship, another lie, and perhaps no chance to learn the names behind the mask." We left Fitzherbert Dock in silence, the air colder now, the mist rising once more over the river. London moved on, unaware that a web of secrets had been pulled into the open by the narrowest of margins. Back at Baker Street, Holmes placed the satchel on the table and poured 2 brandies. "To justice, Watson," he said, "though it often limps just behind the truth, and in the hearth's quiet glow." I could not help but wonder how many other whispers drifted through the night, Unheard, unanswered, undone. The following morning dawned pale and watery, a reluctant sun struggling against the London haze. I found Holmes already awake, standing at the fireplace staring into the flames as though searching for something in their flickering dance. The satchel containing Calloway's documents lay unopened on the table between us, sealed by Holmes's own hand, and a length of red ribbon he had affixed with meticulous care. He turned as I entered. "Watson, the climax has passed, but the resolution has not yet arrived. We stand now upon the knife's edge between exposure and concealment." I rubbed my eyes. "Calloway is in custody. The evidence is overwhelming. Surely that is resolution enough?" Holmes did not answer immediately. He reached for the satchel, unfastened the ribbon, and removed the top sheet once more. I reviewed these documents in the small hours of the morning. Each line, each transaction, most damning. Yet there are inconsistencies. Inconsistencies? Yes. The numbers are precise, but a few references, obscure initials, unusual code names, do not align with the files Mycroft provided me last year concerning suspected infiltration in the Foreign Office. It is possible Calloway's ledger has been embellished. You mean forged? Not forged entirely, no. I believe the documents are genuine, just not complete. Some truths have been amplified, others omitted, which raises a disturbing possibility. Calloway has been playing both sides, but not as a double agent. As a survivor, Holmes threw his coat over his shoulders. "Come, Watson. We must pay a visit to Whitehall, but not the Colonial Office this time. Mycroft awaits us at the Foreign Office." As we made our way through the capital's heart, the streets bustled with oblivious industry. Hansoms jostled for space. Clerks strode to post offices and vendors hawked chestnuts near the Thames embankment. It struck me, as it often did, how far Holmes's world lay beneath this surface, a world of shadowed motives and whispers, disguised as facts. Mycroft Holmes received us in a private chamber tucked behind a thick oak door that bore neither nameplate nor knocker. He was seated at a long table, beneath the sallow glow of a green-shaded lamp, fingers interlaced before him. "Sherlock," he said without rising, "I understand you've captured a ghost." Holmes sat. "Calloway is not a ghost, brother, but a coward with access to a matchbox of dynamite." "I've read the papers," Mycroft said, indicating the open satchel. "Interesting reading. Some of it aligns with what we've long suspected. Other parts, curious." Holmes nodded. "Exactly. The question is no longer who is corrupt, but how many are being protected by the distortion of truth. Calloway's documents do not reveal the whole picture. They reveal his picture." Mycroft steepled his fingers. "So what do you propose?" "That we use him." A silence followed. Holmes continued. "He has positioned himself to become indispensable. If we release the documents as they are, the Foreign Office will fall into chaos, yes. But if we confront Calloway, threaten exposure, force his cooperation, we may compel him to complete the ledger. Names unlisted, transactions omitted, and most crucially the source behind Salazar's initial recruitment. We never learned who backed him. That's the final knot." Mycroft tapped a knuckle against his chin. "You suggest we keep him from prosecution?" Holmes's voice was tight. "For now, as bait. If we move too soon, the others will vanish. We must let the web remain undisturbed just long enough for the spider to show itself." Reluctantly, Mycroft nodded. "I will arrange it. Calloway will be moved to a secure house under guard. He will believe we're preparing an extradition. You will handle the extraction of information." "Agreed," Holmes said, "and I shall begin this very afternoon." As we exited into the cold light of day, I said, "You mean to go alone?" Holmes shook his head. "No, Watson. I shall need your eyes more than ever. We are entering the final stage, and in this play, the actors do not bow until the theater burns." The safe house Mycroft had arranged was a modest 2-story brick dwelling tucked into a quiet street near Lambeth. Disguised as a civil servant's lodging, it was guarded by plainclothes-men with eyes like shutters and hands never far from their pockets. We were shown into the study, where Calloway sat by the window, unshaven but composed. He looked up as we entered, and a thin smile played across his lips. "I gather from the lack of irons and interrogators that I am not to be hanged this morning." "Not yet," Holmes replied. "We require something first." Calloway raised a brow. "A deal?" "No, a debt repaid." Holmes opened the satchel and removed the primary ledger. He flipped it open and placed it on the table before Calloway. "This entry," Holmes said, pointing to a particular name, C. Ellis. "You claimed him as one of the 3 central moles within the Foreign Office. But Ellis died 6 months ago." Calloway blinked. "Impossible." "Not impossible," Holmes said, "but inconvenient for you. Ellis was never a collaborator. He was the one investigating the leak. And his death was sudden. Heart failure, they said." Calloway's mouth moved slightly, then closed again. Holmes pressed on. "I believe you panicked. You inserted Ellis's name to distract from the real culprit, someone still breathing, someone whose identity you dare not commit to paper." Calloway looked away. Holmes lowered his voice. "Tell me, Calloway, who are you still protecting?" There was a long silence. Then quietly Calloway answered, "Sir Percival Wentworth." I blinked. "But he's a senior undersecretary." "He is the senior undersecretary," Calloway said. "He approached me 6 years ago, promised access, protection, promotion. I was young and foolish." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "So you did Salazar's work on behalf of Wentworth?" "No, Salazar came later. He was Wentworth's idea. A buffer, someone to handle the messier work. But Salazar grew too ambitious. Harrington discovered that. And when he did, Wentworth ordered me to contain the fallout. That meant silence, even if it meant Harrington's death." Holmes sat back. "And you obeyed." Calloway bowed his head. "Until it grew too monstrous. I tried to warn Harrington to stop it. But it was too late. Salazar moved first. And now," Holmes said, "you intend to bring down Wentworth and escape the wreckage." Calloway looked up, eyes bloodshot. "I want to live, but I also want the truth known. That is the only absolution left to me." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, make a full copy of the ledger tonight. We'll keep the original locked here. Lestrade must be alerted, but not yet. We must first confront Wentworth and confirm this claim." "But he's a powerful man," I said. "He'll deny it." Holmes's voice was quiet. "Then we must find something he cannot deny." By the time we returned to Baker Street, the lamplighters were already making their rounds, and the evening mist was curling through the chimneys like cautious breath. Holmes moved about our rooms with sharp efficiency, retrieving his files on Wentworth, cross-referencing appointments, addresses, even the man's favored club. He paused before a note in a red folder, something he had marked months earlier in connection to a separate case. He smiled. "Watson, do you recall the affair of the Spanish treaty and the missing minutes of the Alexandria conference?" I blinked. "Vaguely." Wentworth was present. And one dispatch, unsigned but translated, bore phrasing identical to what we now see in Calloway's documents. A flourish of language, maintaining equilibrium through tacit accommodation, a bureaucratic signature. "You think Wentworth wrote it?" "I do. And I intend to prove it." Holmes sat, fingers steepled, gaze far away. "The final move, Watson, is to expose the spider in his web. But unlike most spiders, this one has polished silver and speaks with a baritone. And if he flees?" Holmes smiled grimly. "Then we shall pluck each strand until he has nowhere left to hide. And with that," he poured himself a final measure of brandy and returned to the fire, the city's secrets flickering once more in his eyes. The following morning, Holmes was already fully dressed and writing out a letter in his swift, angular script when I descended from my room. He did not look up as I entered. "To whom are you writing?" I asked, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "To Sir Percival Wentworth," Holmes replied, still scribbling. "A most courteous request for a meeting under the pretense of discussing colonial trade disruptions. He will not refuse, his vanity will not allow it." "You intend to confront him directly?" "Confront, yes. Accuse, no. Not yet." Holmes sanded the ink and folded the paper with precision. "Calloway gave us a name, but names alone will not topple men like Wentworth. They will deny, obscure, distract. We must let him hang himself with his own rope, preferably one spun from his own words." He rang for a messenger, handed off the letter, and turned to me. "While we wait for his reply, I propose we examine the venue of our best leverage." "You mean his club?" "Precisely. The Runnymede Club, exclusive, discreet, and unaccustomed to scandal. A man's pattern of habits often betrays more than his statements. An hour later, we found ourselves walking beneath the portico of the Runnymede Club on Pall Mall, a grand but quiet institution whose mahogany doors had weathered decades of government secrets. Holmes had donned his finest walking coat and I my least worn cravat. It was not a place for threadbare reputations. At the front desk, Holmes presented a card from Mycroft's collection bearing the name of a minor peer. "Lord Wallingford," he whispered to me, "passed away some months ago, but his membership is still honored in the ledger. A minor oversight we shall now exploit." We were admitted with no more than a raised eyebrow from the clerk. The club's main lounge was a study in hushed luxury, leather armchairs, green-shaded lamps, and the faint aroma of old cigars and older secrets. Holmes led me to a seat near the fireplace with a clear view of the far drawing room, where several men sipped brandy and read the morning papers. "There," he murmured, "Wentworth, the tall one with the white mustache and the signet ring. He comes every morning between 11 and 12, reads the Times, and then disappears into the private library." I watched the man. He looked every inch the confident civil servant. Distinguished, deliberate, his presence that of a man untroubled by consequence. Yet Holmes watched him with a gaze usually reserved for the dissection of poisons. We waited, saying little. When the butler announced Wentworth's name again at 5 minutes past noon, the man rose and entered the hallway leading to the club's library. Holmes stood at once. "Now, Watson, quickly." We followed at a discreet distance. The library was on the first floor, behind a carved walnut door. Holmes paused at the end of the corridor and listened. "Alone," he murmured. "Excellent." He pushed open the door without knocking. Sir Percival Wentworth was seated at a long table, a ledger open before him, pen in hand. He looked up sharply. "I beg your pardon?" "Do not rise, Sir Percival," Holmes said calmly. "We won't trouble you long." Wentworth narrowed his eyes. "I know you." The consulting detective. Holmes bowed slightly. "Sherlock Holmes. And this is my associate, Dr. Watson." Wentworth's voice cooled. "And to what do I owe this discourtesy?" Holmes stepped forward, his tone still mild. "To a matter of great discretion and national interest. It concerns the unfortunate demise of James A. Harrington and a set of documents recovered from the vessel Marquesa." Wentworth flinched, only slightly, but Holmes caught it. He pressed on. "You were his superior, were you not?" "I oversaw his department, yes." "Then you are aware he had been investigating irregular communications between Nairobi and Lisbon?" "I am aware he became increasingly unstable. Delusional, some said." Holmes took a sheet of paper from his coat and laid it on the table. It was one of the intercepted dispatches from Calloway's satchel. "This message," Holmes said, "uses a phrase found in no other diplomatic correspondence save one. A phrase you once dictated during the Alexandria conference. A phrase which appears nowhere else in the government's lexicon." Wentworth's jaw tightened. "Coincidence?" Holmes raised a brow. "And yet this same message was traced through accounts linked to Salazar's courier network." "That too a coincidence?" Wentworth said nothing. Holmes leaned in slightly. "Your name appears in ledgers recently recovered from Calloway. Funds routed through shell companies in Tangier and Porto. Large payments. Recurring. I have no knowledge of any such accounts." Holmes's tone remained smooth. "Then you'll have no objection to us reviewing your financial records and questioning your staff." Wentworth rose at last, his hands flat on the table. "You have no warrant, Mr. Holmes?" "No," Holmes said softly. "But I suspect that if I leave here and speak to the right ears at Whitehall, one will be furnished in short order." Wentworth's face changed then. Not fear, but calculation. A long pause followed. Then he said with remarkable calm, "You've always been good at puzzles, Mr. Holmes, but sometimes completing the picture means recognizing what must remain unfinished." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Wentworth said quietly, "that the Colonial Office, the Foreign Office, even Whitehall itself, all rely upon illusions to maintain control. If you expose what you claim to know, the empire will falter. Men like me are not patriots, we are foundations. Remove us and the whole structure leans." I stepped forward. "That is not justice. That is survival through manipulation." "Justice," Wentworth said with a weary smile, "is a dream men like you believe in, because you've never been asked to sacrifice for efficiency." Holmes's eyes were hard. "And how many more must die before that efficiency is preserved?" Wentworth said nothing. He simply picked up his pen and returned to his ledger, dismissing us without a word. Outside the club, Holmes lit a cigarette with hands that trembled slightly, rare for him. We walked in silence for some time. the weight of Wentworth's veiled threat hanging in the air between us like smoke. "He will not be arrested," I said at last. Holmes exhaled slowly. "No, he's too well insulated. But he's vulnerable. We have the documents, the ledger, the pattern. If we present it strategically, to the press, to the committees, to the House itself, he can be stripped of power even if not jailed. And Calloway?" Holmes's jaw clenched. "He'll serve a sentence, but reduced, if he testifies. And Harrington?" Holmes looked out across the Thames. "Harrington died trying to reveal the truth. It is now ours to ensure that truth is not diluted by politics or convenience." We returned to Baker Street as evening settled once more over London. Holmes went to the table and opened the ledger again, laying it beside the letter Harrington had sent to his sister. For a long time he said nothing. Then very softly, "One man's whisper led us to a world of shadows. Now it falls to us, Watson, to ensure the light reaches the places no one dares to look." And with that, the room was silent save the ticking of the mantel clock, an ordinary sound, yet one that now seemed to measure something far weightier than time. That night, Baker Street stood unusually still, as though the house itself were listening. Outside, the lamps of London flickered through the haze like eyes watching in silence. Within our sitting room, Holmes stood by the window unmoving, his gaze fixed on the shadowed rooftops beyond. I sat at the desk reviewing the case notes in order, a ritual I had adopted in our most difficult affairs. But even as I traced the path from the first cryptic message to the name of Sir Percival Wentworth, I sensed that Holmes's mind had already moved beyond the resolution. "You're troubled," I said quietly. Holmes didn't turn. "We've dismantled the mechanism, Watson." "But the clockmaker remains," I looked up. "Wentworth?" Holmes nodded slowly. "He will resign quietly with honors. Mycroft has confirmed as much. The government cannot risk scandal during a volatile session in Parliament. So they will permit a man who trafficked in deceit and enabled murder to retreat with dignity, while the likes of Harrington are buried without a flag." I said nothing. I had long since learned that there were no ready words to offer Holmes when justice and politics collided. We had seen it before, men of means and menace escaping judgment, protected not by innocence but by importance. "And Calloway?" I asked. "He has agreed to testify," Holmes replied. "Under seal. The Foreign Affairs Select Committee will convene in closed chambers next month. They'll use his deposition to institute reforms, reshuffle departments, quiet revolutions under louder debates. And the public?" Holmes finally turned from the window. "They'll never hear the names. Only that a foreign agent was caught smuggling state secrets and a mid-level official was dismissed. The truth will live only in margins and memos." He crossed to the table and opened the satchel of documents once more. With deft hands, he extracted the final sheet, the one Calloway had not included in the main ledger. It was a list of code names and destinations. On the margin, in Calloway's own hand, was a single phrase: "Those still in play." Holmes studied it for several long moments. Then he handed it to me. "There's more, Watson. Men still operating in other ministries. Salazar and Wentworth were the head and the hand. But this suggests the foot soldiers remain." I read through the names. Some I recognized from the newspapers: undersecretaries, naval clerks, junior attachés. Others were unknown to me entirely. Holmes leaned back in his chair. "We solved the mystery, yes. We exposed the murderers and untangled the web, but we did not dismantle the structure that allowed it to exist. It remains like dry timber waiting for the next spark." "You mean to pursue them?" I said, more a statement than a question. He smiled faintly. "Of course. But carefully, quietly. A single misstep and the doors will all close." There came a knock at the door, sharp, purposeful. Mrs. Hudson appeared a moment later, her face solemn. "Gentlemen," she said, "Inspector Lestrade is here." Lestrade entered quickly, hat in hand, coat still damp from the fog. He looked at Holmes with a mixture of relief and concern. "I've just come from Lambeth," he said. "Calloway is gone." Holmes stood abruptly. "Gone? How?" "Poison," Lestrade said grimly. "Cyanide. In his tea, delivered not long after the guard changed. No note, no witnesses. Instant death." I felt a chill run through me. "Then someone got to him." Lestrade nodded. "My men are questioning the staff, but it's clear this was planned. Someone knew where he was, knew the schedule." Holmes's eyes went cold. "Wentworth." He's still under watch, Lestrade said. But I wouldn't put it past him to have had contingencies. Holmes paced slowly. Then Calloway's death is a signal. A warning to the others. Loose ends are being tied off, which means we're out of time. Lestrade looked toward the satchel. Do we still have enough? Yes, Holmes said quietly. His death does not erase the facts, but it makes prosecution complicated. And it tells us we were right. The roots run deeper than we thought, Lestrade nodded. I'll double the guard on the others mentioned in his ledger. After he left, Holmes remained standing for some time, his face unreadable. At last he said, Calloway was neither hero nor villain. He tried to do right, but only after surviving by doing wrong. I cannot mourn him as I did Harrington, but I acknowledge the part he played. He returned to the fireplace and lit his pipe. The room filled slowly with curls of blue smoke, rising like thoughts left unspoken. Do you regret taking the case? I asked. Holmes looked into the fire. No, but I regret the cost. Harrington was a man of conscience, Watson. That is a rare and dangerous trait in government service. He glanced at the pile of documents one last time, then closed the satchel and carried it to the bookcase. Sliding aside a volume of Bentham's essays, he placed it behind and sealed the cabinet. The rest, he said, will wait. Several weeks passed. True to Holmes's prediction, the affair entered public record only in fragments. The newspapers reported the arrest of Salazar and his associates, the mysterious death of a foreign courier, and the retirement, due to health concerns, of Sir Percival Wentworth. No mention was made of Calloway. No tribute was given to James Harrington. But behind the scenes, inquiries were launched, files reclassified, positions quietly reassigned. Holmes received a sealed letter from Mycroft, brief but telling. The roots you exposed will be pruned, though not removed. The tree must remain. But know this, brother, there are fewer shadows than before. When I read it, I looked up at Holmes. Is that victory? He gave a thin smile. A kind of it. We resumed our work. Cases came and went. A stolen Rembrandt, a duel that ended in mystery, a child who vanished with a music box. Yet every so often Holmes would pause with that distant look in his eyes, his thoughts returning to the man who left a whisper on our doorstep, and the web of lies spun beneath Blackfriars Bridge. One evening, months later, I found Holmes at the window once more, pipe in hand, watching the night with quiet intensity. You're thinking of Harrington again, I said. Holmes nodded. He was not the sort of man who would ever become famous, but he was the sort of man who should be remembered. Then he turned and said with rare softness, Promise me, Watson, when you write this case, do not dress it in glory. Write it plainly. Let the facts speak. Let the reader feel the weight of silence, of things not shouted from rooftops but whispered in the dark. I promise, I said, and so I do. Let this stand as record. Sherlock Holmes and the Whisper from Blackfriars Bridge was not a tale of triumph, but of revelation, bitter, necessary, and unfinished. The names in the ledger may fade. The fog may rise once more, but somewhere in the memory of London a whisper still lingers, of a man who knew too much, a detective who saw too clearly, and a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. Dr. John H. Watson. Watson. It was nearly spring when the last piece fell into place. Holmes and I were walking in Regent's Park, the afternoon sun weak but determined, casting pale light over bare branches just beginning to bud. For weeks we had spoken little of the Blackfriars affair. The case in official terms was over. Salazar imprisoned, Wentworth quietly retired, and Calloway's name erased by circumstance and cyanide. Yet I knew Holmes was not finished. He walked with hands behind his back, head bowed as though studying the path beneath his feet. I've had a reply from Lisbon, he said at last. To your inquiry on the banking ledgers? Holmes nodded. The final account. The one Calloway claimed belonged to Salazar's financier. It was opened under the name of a Portuguese textile merchant, dead for 10 years. But the signature on the account application matched another I found in the Alexandria minutes. I stopped. You mean Wentworth? Holmes turned toward me. Wentworth's valet. His voice was very calm. He was more than a manservant, Watson. He was Wentworth's courier, confidant and handler of private affairs. His name is George Lister. He had access to sensitive documents, made routine trips across the channel, and sent the poisoned tea to Calloway under the guise of a food delivery clerk. But why kill Calloway after Wentworth had already been exposed? Because Wentworth had begun to fear Calloway would change his story, or name names that had thus far remained hidden, and because Lister was the last man with enough loyalty, or enough to lose, to clean up what Wentworth could no longer manage. I frowned. So Lister was the spider's last thread. Holmes nodded. And I cut it last night. He handed me a folded telegram. It read, George Lister detained at Dover docks attempted to board ferry under false papers, carried diplomatic correspondence and 2 passports, full confession obtained. Lestrade exhaled slowly. Then it's done. Holmes did not reply immediately. He resumed walking more slowly now. Not done, but concluded. The machine they built will not turn again, at least not in the same hands. You've done it, Holmes, all of it. From the message at the door to the man at the bridge and the ledger and the lies, every step unraveled. He gave a small, rueful smile. It was not I who began it, Watson. It was Harrington, a quiet man who listened to the wrong whisper and dared to wonder what it meant. We returned to Baker Street in the late afternoon, the sun casting long golden fingers across the study walls. Holmes sat at his desk, examining the last of the evidence, then slipped it into a file marked with a single word, Blackfriars. He slid the file into a drawer, locked it, and returned the key to his pocket. I poured us each a brandy and raised my glass. To Harrington, Holmes lifted his, to the whisper that told the truth. We drank in silence, the room filled with the soft ticking of the mantel clock. That night, as I prepared my notes for the final chapter, Holmes stood once more at the window. The fog had lifted. The stars rarely seen in London's haze were faint but visible overhead. It ends not with a pistol or a confession, he murmured, but with a name in a ledger, a man on a bridge, and a voice that was nearly too soft to hear. I wrote the words exactly as he spoke them, not because they were dramatic, but because they were true, and so, let this record show. The case of Sherlock Holmes and the whisper from Blackfriars Bridge was solved not by force nor by fortune, but by persistence, the relentless pursuit of clarity in a world that profits from shadows, the man with the limp, the whisper in the fog, the ledger that bled, all real and all now behind us, and all